Well, today I would like for us to start out by answering this question, and this just happens to be the title of the message today. And the question is this: who are you? Well, usually when somebody asks us this question, we generally reply by telling them our name. That might be followed by an occupation we have, or some other earthly role, or maybe even some kind of hobby. Well, I'm John Doe, electrician, husband, father, and a card player you don't want to bet against. Now, if we're super spiritual, we might reply with something more like this: I am a child of the King. I'm more than an overcomer. I am the head and not the tail. I am His. But whichever response you might have to that question, is that really who you are? Well, everyone walking with God fits the latter description. And well, the first description is just roles that are temporary while you are eternal. And even the last one, the more spiritual sounding one, describes things that involve, to one degree or another, your temporary form and the temporary things with which we're familiar on this earth. Above and not beneath, the head and not the tail, victorious over my enemies. Wonderful things. But when there are no enemies, no things to overcome, no hindrances to being face to face with the great I Am, then who are you? You are His, right? Well, this is very true, but then so are the cattle on 1,000 hills. Are you a cow? Are you a bull? Well, some of us guys might agree with the last one. Yep, I'm a strong, manly bull. Don't mess with me. But seriously, who are you? Now, in Revelation chapter 2 and verse 17, in the vision that was given to John, Jesus says this: He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. To him who overcomes, I will give some of the hidden manna to eat, and I will give him a white stone, and on the stone a new name written, which no one knows except him who receives it. Now, if you've been in the church scene for very long, you're probably familiar with this verse. A white stone with a new name, which only you know. So when someone asks you, who are you? Your answer would be, oh, wouldn't you like to know? Right? Now, to shed some light on this, let's consider the historical significance of a white stone. First, it was a token of innocence. A Greek judge back in that time period would place a white stone in the ballot box to pronounce acquittal. The white stone said, basically, you are not guilty, you are innocent. It's very nice symbolism, especially when you think about what Jesus did for us. Here's another one: the high priest's headdress. It was engraved, it contained a white stone which was engraved with a phrase that signified the name of God, which name only the high priest knew how to utter. That's very interesting stuff. But again, when someone asks, who are you? Will you reply with, sorry, can't tell you? Now, I personally suspect that this symbolism is meant to point to a truth that is beyond the mind's ability to comprehend. Just like your new name. and by name. Just maybe it could be quite possible that this is not referring to vowels and consonants, to a sound written on paper or uttered by the human tongue. When we refer to the names of God, we are referring to descriptions of His nature. And God's nature cannot be reduced to human words. It can only be pointed to. Human words fall vastly short, and they can only be used to point to something that our minds cannot and can never understand. The mind, after all, dwells in and is trapped within the realm of form. It cannot grasp the formless. For the formless is not a thing that can be analyzed or dissected or broken down into pieces and compartments. It cannot be reached, for it is not in the realm of space. It can neither begin nor end, for it is not in the realm of time. And yet, we seek to understand it with a tool that we have been given which can never comprehend it. Kind of like trying to read a book with a screwdriver. The screwdriver cannot see or read or understand, can it? And the mind cannot know the formless any more than a screwdriver can know the contents of that book. Now, you might have seen the animated movie Home on the Range. We've seen it, to be perfectly honest, several times. It's about a cattle rustler who steals cattle to put ranchers out of business so that they have to sell their farms, which he then, in disguise, buys. In one particular scene, he's talking with his not-so-intelligent helpers, and he puts on his disguise to show them how he pulls off his land grab. And as soon as his physical form looks different, they no longer know who he is. Let's listen to a small clip of this, and then we'll talk about it.
That's right. He had a farm. Now that all his cash cows have disappeared, that poor sap's going to be flat broke. Perfect time for a certain upstanding landowner to step in and take all the land.
Who are you?
What do you do with Uncle Slim?
Put up your dukes, Mr. Fancy Britches.
It's me. Hello. This here is the disguise I use to sneak into all them auctions and buy all the land. You brainless, monotone monkeys.
You know, since all we know, or all the mind knows, is the form, when the form changes or when it dissolves, we don't recognize who or what is underneath. We know personalities, persons, we know histories, we know choices, we know desires, we know tendencies. All things that are created by the mind, none of which are who you are. They don't even really exist. It's not uncommon for the topic of, for example, sexual identity to come up in discussions. Now, my personal opinion doesn't really matter, not in the least. All I can do is point to what Jesus said. But when I do, people tend to get really offended. Why? Because we feel as though the temporary form is who we are. If even Jesus questions the perfection of our imperfect form, we take offense. We have desires and we make an identity out of those desires. So to suggest that those desires are not good is to suggest that we are bad. It feels almost like being told to sit in the back of the bus because our skin is too dark. But none of those forms are who you are. You can disagree. The mind will disagree. And you can believe it. And you can thus remain trapped in and enslaved by that which is passing away. The earth and all its desires and pleasures and pains. The mind and its vastly limited understanding and opinions and reactions. Or you can let those things go. You can finally wake up and finally be free. My temporary person feels various desires that, if I identified with them, would change my choices, would change my lifestyle, and would lock me in a dreadful prison of shame, of self-defense, and of separation from the pure nature of God. But I recognize that all those things are just creations of the mind. They aren't even real. They are not eternal. They are not who I am. And so, I'm not lost in them. And I do not have to act upon them. I can watch them come and go. And I can see them come. I can see them go. I can witness the mind yell out to fulfill them and make excuses why I should, or why it's okay, or why it's not so bad. And I label that as neither good nor bad. I don't label it at all. It simply is. That's what this form, this temporary form, the form I used to think is me, does. It's being changed, true, but ultimately it is passing away. Here for a moment, and then it is gone. That's what the scripture means when it says this life, this form, what we think of as this life, is like a vapor. Here for an instant, and then vanishes away. And instead, I can be fully present in the heavenly places, which are here and now, not lost in mind, resting in the perfect peace with the Prince of Peace. He changes the person, and I can watch it happen, not identifying with it, for it is not who I am. Not obeying it, for it is just a temporary thing. Not defending it, for in this place I feel no need and no desire to do so. After all, why defend something that is just a fantasy inside the head? If I identify with it, then real actions come out of its thoughts. I am controlled by those. I am a slave to those desires. But I am not it. It is not me. I have a new name, an always fresh name, a name which cannot be uttered by the tongue, a name which cannot be written on paper, but it is my true nature, who I really am, beneath the form that I always thought was me. So now I ask you this again. Who are you? Now that question cannot truly be answered. It's kind of like a cone, which is a question that cannot be answered and is asked so that the student can transcend the limited mind, which cannot answer the question, and know experientially the limitless answer. And that, my friends, is just like God.